Hi everyone, David Voltson from Emotional Embuffination here, and in this video we're going to be talking about what is potentially a sensitive topic, and that is parental alienation, so stay tuned. All right, parental alienation. Specifically, I want to talk about two things. Number one, what is it? What does parental alienation mean? And then number two, if it's going on in your life, what do you do about it? All right, let's start with the definition. This is a difficult thing because there's actually some controversy surrounding the definition, but for our purposes, I'm going to try to just say as simply as I can, it's essentially a scenario where one parent is trying to alienate another parent from the child or children. Say that a little bit more in English. In essence, it's a scenario where you've got two parents and one of the parents is doing something where they're trying to essentially brainwash a kid or kids such that they hate the other parent or don't want anything to do with the other parent. They're alienating this other person. And we see this a lot in the family law universe, and there's actually some controversy surrounding it because, number one, we've struggled with the definition of what does it mean, when is it happening. There's a really interesting opinion out of a court in New York where they go into a lot of depth about some of the struggles of recognition of this. It's not in the DSM. That's sort of if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of the Bible of all sorts of disorders. There's some distinctions about where does this end and begin? You know, how much behavior becomes alienating behavior? If I just make an offhanded comment, have I gone into alienation? Specifically, we're talking about more extreme scenarios for our purposes. Now, there's a lot of mixed advice. I have seen so much stuff on the internet and in videos, and everybody's saying all sorts of different stuff. A lot of it's conflicting. A lot of it I flat out disagree with. I've seen this in a bunch of cases that I've worked on as a family court attorney. I have seen this with people that are near to me in my own personal circle. I strongly believe this is a legitimate phenomena. So with that, I'm going to describe to you the things that I think you should be doing if you are facing parental alienation. All right, rule number one. This is probably the most important of all of them. Do what you can to preserve your time with your kid. Now, I say that understanding that it sounds a little flippant when I say it because there's a lot that goes into just this. There's probably going to be a legal battle if the other parent is trying to hunt down time with the kid, if they're trying to carve you out. You may well have to go through the court system. You may have to jump whatever hoops are going on there, but it's really important that you preserve time with your kid. The reason is that in an ideal situation, if you've got a parent that is alienating the other parent, the easiest resolution to that would be to just carve out the bad parent. Make them not a part of the kid's life so that the non-bad parent has all the time. And as long as that's going on, you're not facing all this brainwashing, right? Unfortunately, as a practical matter, that doesn't really happen. Again, the courts are kind of all over the map with that. I have seen so many instances where you can unequivocally say parental alienation is going on and courts don't care. Or if they do, they seem to only nominally care, or it just becomes some weird sanction but doesn't actually change the time that's going on. So with that in mind, you need to be fighting for something, at least maintain some sort of a foothold in your child's life to ensure that you've still got a voice in what's going on. Because if this is in reverse and the alienating parent is able to just have all the time with the kid, they're going to completely brainwash your child and make it such that you are just this inhuman monster that they don't ever see. And because they aren't seeing them, well, you must have abandoned us. So why would I care about you? And you need to prevent that from happening. So it is extremely, extremely important that you have a foothold, that you have time, that you are able to express to your kid that you care about them, that you are able to say, hey, I'm here, I'm a person, I'm part of your life, and be a part of their life. So rule number one, before anything else, make sure that you're preserving time with your kid. And whatever that looks like, maybe it's not equal time. It's realistically probably not going to be a scenario that you want where you're wiping out the other parent, but fight for something. Make sure that you're still involved in your kid's life. Okay, bullet point number two is something I've talked about in Emotional Embuffination quite a bit. I've got a whole separate video on this related to kind of adult situations, but this rule I think applies equally to children and adults, and that is don't argue with facts. I've seen contradictory advice to this with respect to parental alienation, but here's the problem. Kids work the same way as adults in this respect, and what they do is they become convinced of something, and then they become emotionally invested in that position. And once you're emotionally invested in something, if you start arguing with the person, then all that really does is kind of worse than nothing, because it actually makes them more entrenched in the position that they're in. And there's research supporting this. The idea that, if I start arguing with you about something that you're emotionally invested in, you're going to become more invested in that thing. Now, if what we're talking about is we're arguing about whether you've done horrible things or you're a monster versus the other parent, and the kid is already poisoned to the point where they believe that, or they believe some story about some stuff that you've done, then they're going to become more entrenched in that position if you start getting into these huge debates with them. On top of that, you start to create scenarios where you're spending all of your time with your kid arguing about what's going on between you and the other parent, and you just create this really negative and toxic environment with your kid, because now they're going to get upset, you're going to get upset, you're going to spend a lot of time discussing this, and now all you've done with your time is made them feel like garbage, make you feel like garbage, and everybody feels toxic. They start resenting you because their time with you is just arguing and nothing fun. So instead of arguing with facts, if you start getting into situations about dad or mom said you did XYZ in the court case, then deflect it, redirect it off into something else. You can say things like, well, we shouldn't even be talking about the court case. That's between your mom and I, or your dad and I, and you just need to worry about, your time with us. And, when you're with whichever one of us, you should do your homework, play, have a good time, whatever it is. But you shouldn't be worrying about these adult things. Do what you can to get out of these discussions where it just devolves into a terrible argument, because it does nothing positive. So don't argue with facts. Number 3 is kind of a good piggyback onto the same concept of don't argue with facts. And number 3 is to focus on feelings. This is something that you can do with a lot of people, not just kids, but kids are extremely susceptible to this, where they're very driven by what they're feeling. And human beings are emotional creatures. And so if I start to really like my time with someone, I start to gravitate more to them. If I start to resent my interactions with a person, then I start to dread being around them. And so what you want to do is start to create a really positive environment where you're with your kid. And that means do things that are going to make them feel good. It doesn't mean just do whatever they want. I'm not saying abrogate your responsibility as a parent, make sure you're still doing things that are related to discipline and whatnot. Don't let your kid walk all over you, but at the same time, try to do things that are going to make them feel positive. Children they're going to have different interests, and you can talk to them about what is it you're interested in. Do they like a particular video game? Talk to them about the video game. I've had conversations with my kids where I say, hey, what's going on that game? And they will just go off and tell me all these exciting things. Or maybe I just walk in and I spend a few minutes watching them play the game. Or, is there a park they like to go to? Is there an activity they like to do? Is there a board game that they're into? Is there some place they can hike with you, or some store that you can go to? Whatever it is that they are interested in, if you start fixating on the emotions around that thing, then that alone starts to create a different kind of relationship between you and them. And note that this is even despite they can be saying something that is completely contradictory because they're aligned with some other parent, or with the other parent. It can be completely contradictory to what they're experiencing. For example, I've seen situations like this where a kid says, I absolutely hate hiking. I don't know why anyone would hike. Hiking is a stupid thing. But then you go with them and they go hiking, and even though they're initially complaining about it, then they have this amazing time and they think it's great, but then their words seem to contradict the experience that you're watching. So watch their feelings, and this is why this dovetails back into the last one about arguing facts, because sometimes you'll have people that are arguing, kids or adults, that are arguing about something that's not really what they believe. It's just these words on the surface that they think they need to do. Do this with your kids. Create a positive environment. Fixate on feelings. All right, the next one may sound a little flippant, and I don't mean it to be, and I know this is going to be easier said than done, but it is to be confident. Here's the thing with that. There's a fair amount of research showing that human beings, again, not just kids, but kids especially, human beings gravitate to confidence. We have situations where somebody might not know what the heck they're talking about, but if they say something very confidently, other people start to follow them. They will think they'll make that person a leader. I mean, there's whole studies around selection of leaders where somebody just sort of speaks first or sounds more confident, and that person becomes the position of authority. And that's just because they sound confident. Now, especially if you're having a breakup, you have a situation where the kid's life feels like it's in turmoil, then your kid is going to be trying hard to find any sort of sense of security in their world. They don't want to feel like there's all these unknown, scary things about life, and so they're going to gravitate to confidence. One of the problems that I often see, particularly in abusive type relationships, is if you've just come out of an abuse dynamic, or you've got a situation where the other parent sounds super confident and you feel like your entire life is falling apart, it obviously becomes very difficult to sound confident, and you might even completely break down. You might have these moments where you're like crying in front of your child, or you're like, I don't know what's going on. You feel like you're worthless, and all these insecurities and all these uncertainties and everything starts to project outwards, and your kid picks up on it. And if your kid starts to pick up on it, and the other parent, who might be abusive, or at a bare minimum might be exhibiting some sort of narcissistic style behaviors, then if they sound confident, the kid is going to say unconsciously, well, that other parent sounds confident, so I'm going to graft onto them and just do what they say because I want to feel safe. That's why I know it's very easy to say, just be confident, but at a bare minimum, try to minimize the sense of uncertainty that you're dumping onto your kid. So if you've got to cry, and I understand that's going to happen in breakups, I've done it myself, don't do it in front of your kids. Don't have breakdowns in front of your kids. Don't get inebriated and falling all over the place in front of your kids. Do what you can to keep yourself in control. And when you're talking to your kid, express sentiments of confidence. Say things like, we're going to get through this, I can solve this, I've got the answers, or we're going to figure out the answers. That's the sort of message you want to convey. I know it's difficult. I know it's really hard to sound confident, especially when you feel like the world is falling apart, especially if you've just been coming out of an abusive relationship, but your child needs a sense of security. And if you can't provide some level of that, if you can't provide at least a defense from your own uncertainty about what's going on to your kid, that can easily push them into the alienation realm and right into what the other parent is wanting to say. So do what you can to stay confident. The next one is potentially a little controversial, and this isn't going to apply in every single circumstance, but I've seen it enough that I feel like it's noteworthy. And that is to acknowledge gender distinctions. Now, again, this isn't going to apply in all scenarios, but I have noticed a lot of situations where a child wants to gravitate to a parent of the same gender. Many of the alienation cases that I have seen have dealt with dad and son carving out mom, or mom and daughter carving out dad. And that's certainly not fair, but I think what happens is a lot of times you'll have children that are really, a boy really wants to associate with sort of traditionally masculine things, or things that he thinks are more male oriented, and the same thing with girls. They want to model and emulate women very often. And again, this is not always the case. There are exceptions to this, but there's frequently this pattern going on. And as a result of that child can easily gravitate to the corresponding parent, boys with dad, moms with, daughters with mom. And so I'm only bringing this up to highlight the fact that sometimes there's a very, very difficult battle going on, because if, say, you're in that situation where you're mom and you have a son, and your son seems to be just aligning with his dad, then I would say acknowledge to a certain extent that this is not just a competition between you and the other parent. Now, I recognize that the other parent is bad-mouthing you and saying all these terrible things about you, but at the same time, try to acknowledge that your son or daughter, if you're dealing with dad situation, whichever the corresponding thing is, acknowledge that your child needs to have a relationship with that other parent. And don't get caught up into this, I'm losing my kid because they're starting to buy into some of these things because they've grafted onto whatever the gender is. Again, I'm only bringing this to highlight your awareness to it, and to not totally beat yourself up or fall into a downward spiral just because it feels like your kid is grafted more onto the other parent. This is not a contest. This is not a competition between you and the other parent per se. Just recognize that your kid needs the other parent as well as they need you. And even if that other parent is dysfunctional, which, if you're in a parental alienation situation, they are dysfunctional, then even in that scenario, they're going to have a very deep-seated need to graft onto something that aligns with their gender perception. So just acknowledge that and don't try to combat it, but continue to be there for your kid, because even if you've got the opposite gender going on, they need you. A boy needs his mom, a daughter needs her dad. They still need you. It's just you're going to be in a slightly different role potentially. All right, the last one that I want to offer to you is to allow your kids to be. And one of the things that I see very often, particularly in parents that are very driven by kind of concerns about discipline or making sure that kids are doing the right thing, is where they start to almost coerce their children with their own values, or they get very angry at their kids, or they push really hard to make their kids do what they think is right, without any sort of exceptions or allowances for things that the kids are interested in. This really, really requires some listening. You have to spend some time listening to your kids and allowing them to be, and allowing them to kind of explore what life is going to be like. Allow them to make mistakes. Allow them to kind of figure some of their life out. Now, this is within the parameters of parenting. I'm not saying, again, just abrogate all your parental responsibilities and allow your kids to go kill themselves or anything. But at the same time, allow them to be, allow them to explore the world, allow them to enjoy things that they're interested in. Don't try to constantly crush them. Don't be so driven by your concerns about the other parent that you're shutting down anything the kid says or has interest in. Just let them be kids. And that's it. One of the final thoughts that I would give to you with respect to parental alienation is that I know I've just given you a bunch of rules here. Some of them may sound a little overly simplistic, and to a certain extent they are, because this is a really, really difficult battle, and it's something you have to do over a course of many years, generally speaking, because you have to continue to interact with this other parent for quite a while. You have your kids for a while, and even after they've grown up, sometimes you still have to continue to interact with this other parent, and sometimes you even have to see them if you go to college graduations or weddings, or all sorts of other things where you can still run into this other parent. And at a bare minimum, presumably, you're still going to be involved in your kid's life. And so this is more of a marathon, and it can be extraordinarily difficult. And the final thought that I would leave to you here is, do not give up on this. Continue to be there, continue to be present, even if it feels like you're in a losing uphill battle. Continue to be there, because it is so important in the long run, in my opinion, that you are just there and you are trying your best to be a good parent and to be present for your child. Because if you are there, it is so much harder for your kid as an adult to look back and think, my mom wasn't there, my dad wasn't there. But I assure you, I've talked to so many people that resent so much when a parent was not there. And it is so easy for the parent that is trying to carve you out of the picture to say, well, look, your mom or your dad has just abandoned you. They clearly don't care about you. I'm the one that cares about you if you aren't there. So be present. Do not give up. Stay with this. I know it's hard, but you can do this. Just stick with it. Keep swimming and just do not give up. That's all I have for this. There's a ton more we can talk about with parental alienation. This is a huge topic, but there's a lot to work through just within these simple concepts here. So if you are dealing with a situation of parental alienation, I wish my best luck to you. But more important than luck is something that you create, and that is your persistence and your diligence, and you're doing everything you can to be a good parent.